If you don't know, Infinity Train is an anthology cartoon with each season having a different main character, but all taking place on the same mystical train, adding up to be a larger narrative about the train itself. And I fully believe that Infinity Train was on track to be one of the greatest cartoons of all time before it was tragically cancelled before the conclusion of its story. But personally, I still consider it to be one of the greatest cartoons of all time, even in its unfinished state, but I do believe that if it was able to conclude its story on its own terms, then that title would have been undeniable. And this show is so well done that I could legitimately see any of its 4 seasons being somebody's favorite. Season 1 feels more whimsical and lighthearted than the rest while still being deeply personal.
You guys are the ones whose divorce keeps messing everything up, not me!
Season 2 feels more mature with themes of identity and featuring an extended game of cat and mouse.
I am a person! I deserve a number!
Season 3 is the darkest season of the show, where the show takes itself the most serious.
Time to go?
Time to go.
And season 4 is a much needed break from the intensity of the previous 2 seasons, having some of the best comedy of the show and focusing on friendship.
Train to nowhere, train to nowhere, train to nowhere, at least you're there.
The cancellation of Infinity Train is a tragedy that still haunts me to this day, but I want this video to be much more about me appreciating the show for what it is. I am going to be recapping a lot of what happens in the show in this video, but this video is not going to be a summary of the show. This is more of me analyzing and interpreting the different characters of the show and speculating on aspects of the show that we never got answers to. Also, here's a big spoiler warning that I'm about to spoil the whole show, and keep in mind the show has a lot of twists and turns to it, so it would definitely be worth it to avoid spoilers if you're interested in watching the show. Tulip is the protagonist of season 1, and her story actually seems pretty down to earth compared to what happens in the other seasons, but don't get me wrong, season 1 still doesn't shy away from having its crazy and intense moments in there too. Tulip's character arc in season 1 is about her coming to terms with the truth of her parents getting divorced and actually acknowledging that truth instead of just doing other things all the time to take her mind off of it, like working on her video game that she's been developing.
Tulip, wait. Let's talk about this.
No, I'm going back to my game.
It's so impressive how season 1 can set up so much for the later seasons, but when that stuff is introduced in season 1, it's all in service of Tulip and her personal journey. Amelia is a very important character in the lore of the show, with her own personal struggles, but when she's introduced in season 1, her story perfectly mirrors Tulip and helps her realize what she's been doing wrong this whole time. MT has a whole season exploring her issues that she has to face, but when she's introduced in season 1, she literally and figuratively mirrors Tulip and her struggle to face the truth of her situation. 1-1 is a super important character in the lore of the show, but in season 1 he also has a full episode dedicated to him feeling guilty over something that's out of his control, again perfectly mirroring Tulip and her situation. I just really love how this show can introduce something that acts as setup for a future plotline while simultaneously propelling the character development of this season's protagonist forward. Tulip's loyalty to her friends is something that ends up being surprisingly really important to the plot, getting her into various problematic situations such as her refusing to leave Atticus at the end of the season until he's turned back to normal, or like not agreeing to give up 1-1 at the beginning of the season, which leads to several problems for her. But ultimately her loyalty to her friends ends up being the reason that she gets to go home in the end. I also think that this aspect of her character makes her very likable. I also like how Tulip really speaks her mind almost all the time, and I felt like she was really realistically portrayed. I often found myself thinking that if I was in her situation, I would do the exact same thing. I also want to mention that design-wise, I think her one glove look is iconic, and I was kind of surprised to notice on my rewatch that she only has the one glove on for 2 episodes. It's still an iconic look though in my opinion. Also, when discussing the protagonists of the show, it's pretty necessary to talk about the supporting characters that they all come with, and the supporting cast for season 1 is once again nothing short of iconic. I absolutely love Atticus, but I will say that I would have liked to see some sort of character development from him, since he doesn't really have a character arc at all throughout season 1, but he still has a very strong personality and acts as a powerful driving force for the plot and for Tulip's development, to the point that he's almost like a mentor figure for Tulip. But it doesn't really come across that way since their relationship dynamic is much more like that of a friendship. 1-1 is also a pretty fun character that's basically like two characters in one. He provides a lot of comedic relief, and the reveal of him being the conductor feels properly set up but also not predictable, and it clears up a lot of the mystery surrounding his character while setting him up for his role in future seasons. I'd also like to mention that even though I said that I would have liked to see some sort of character arc for Atticus, I fully understand that they didn't really have the time to add something like that. This first season doesn't really have any time to spare and goes at a breakneck speed to the point that I would say it's actually a little too fast paced, but I feel like that's kind of a good problem to have because it goes to show how ambitious they were being with this first season. And honestly, I think I'd rather have a show be too fast paced than too slowly paced, especially when it's only working with 10 episode seasons. So yeah, this first season is amazing. Honestly, I don't even know if I could pick a favorite episode from it, but the Cats car is a standout to me, and so is the Chrome car episode, but I might be biased towards that episode because it sets up MT, who is the protagonist of season 2, and who is also an S tier protagonist. MT was originally the reflection of Tulip that escaped from the Chrome car and now wants to live her own life. She changes her appearance and starts having her own experiences trying to form her own identity, but her freedom is severely restricted by the Reflection Police, who are aggressively hunting her down with the sole goal of actually just killing her since she's a rogue reflection. Also, since the Reflection Police are from the mirror world, they can come out of any reflective surface and start chasing MT. This makes them a huge issue for MT since you never know when you're about to come across a reflective surface. Her name throughout the season is MT, which stands for Mirror Tulip, but this is just a temporary name while she forms her own identity. This is also probably a good time to mention that since MT was originally a reflection of Tulip, they actually both have the same voice actress, being voiced by Ashley Johnson, who is goated. Season 2 actually has two protagonists, which will actually become the norm for this show going forward. The other protagonist for this season is Jessie. MT and Jessie decide to stick together because they both become friends with a magical deer named Alan Dracula, and neither of them want to leave the deer. This is despite MT not liking Jessie at all in the beginning. MT agrees to help Jessie get his number down so that he can get to his exit sooner, and MT can have the deer all to herself. MT is super standoffish to Jessie when they first meet, but Jessie just kind of takes it and still wants to be friends with her. It becomes clear pretty soon that this is a symptom of a larger problem Jessie has, where he always wants to please everyone and come off as likable to others, to the point that he'll do just about anything to fit in. Jessie and MT have a great character dynamic playing off of each other super well, and Jessie wanting to be friends with MT in the beginning despite her poor treatment of him is a perfect introduction to his overly people-pleasing behavior. To be completely honest, I think season 1 is excellent, but I think season 2 is a step up from season 1 in basically every way. And I think that's in large part due to there being two protagonists for this season, allowing them to have a character dynamic that's deeper than anything we got in season 1. I also think the humor is better in season 2, and I think season 2 doesn't have any of the pacing issues that season 1 had. It is fast paced, but it doesn't feel rushed. There is a trade-off to having two protagonists though, and that is instead of having two side characters, we only have one, Alan Dracula. Alan Dracula has some insanely overpowered magical abilities, but since he acts more like a normal animal most of the time and can't really be controlled or ordered to do anything by anyone, he ends up being sort of a wild card because you never know when he might decide to do something crazy. Alan Dracula can't talk, and it's hard to tell if he can understand speech, but he is definitely intelligent though, using his magical abilities when it seems necessary and coming in clutch often. This gives him a good amount of personality, but he still comes off much more like an animal than a person, unlike a lot of the other animals on the train that are very anthropomorphized. Season 2 also includes the two Reflection police officers chasing MT as an antagonistic presence that's felt throughout the whole season, unlike season 1 where the real antagonist doesn't reveal themselves to Tulip until much later in the season. The two officers don't have the most screen time, but they have great characterization in the moments where they do appear, like in the Toad car episode where Agent Steve tries to persuade Jessie to let him into the car, while Agent Mace leaves to fetch the lawbreaker to break into the car. The difference in how they approach the same situation really shows off their different personalities. And remember how I said that season 1 was sort of lighthearted compared to the later seasons of the show? Well, season 3 is for sure the season with the darkest and most serious tone out of all of them, and in season 2 you can actually see the show change from having a more lighthearted tone to a more serious tone, specifically in the mall car episode and in the Wasteland episode. I think this change to a more serious tone is cemented when Jesse finds his exit at the end of the mall car episode, and MT realizes that she actually physically can't go through the exit with him. A fun character like Jesse leaving the show this unexpectedly soon into the season works great as a catalyst for a tonal shift for the show moving into a more serious tone. Also, I noticed a parallel between MT not being able to take the train exit in season 2 and MT not being able to leave the reflection car in season 1, which really just makes this moment in season 2 hit even harder. Also, even though the train has always been the source of the conflict of the show since the beginning, I think when Officer Mace brings up to MT the idea that maybe the train created them specifically only to help passengers and that they were never meant to have freedom is one of the first times that the idea is brought up in the show that maybe the train itself as a system is horribly flawed. Which brings up the interesting concept of if the design of the train is flawed, then who's responsible for this? We know that 1-1 is the conductor of the train and that he designs the cars of the train, so it seems like he's responsible to at least some degree, but I don't know if it's that simple. The conductor of the train isn't necessarily the same person who invented the train. Also, it's worth mentioning that 1-1 is definitely a robot, and it seems like he was programmed with the purpose of conducting this train, so that implies that 1-1 was created by some other entity to run this train. But who would this other entity be? It's hard to tell, but let's keep this in mind going forward. The resolution of this season is so satisfying after how harrowing the journey got for MT towards the end, and it's just great to see MT and Jesse reunite. The relationship between these two is probably my favorite out of the whole show, and it sucks that we didn't get to see more of them together because they're really only like locked in for like 2 episodes before Jesse gets his exit, and then he doesn't come back until the last episode. Also, when MT exits the train is when she cements her own identity by choosing her own name. She calls herself Lake. Not gonna lie, I thought this name choice was a little random, but I guess it fits because it's like something that's reflective but has a positive connotation. Either way, it's not a bad name, so I'm not mad about it. I've seen people interpret Lake's story as an allegory for being transgender, and I think this is a pretty valid way to interpret the themes of Lake's story, because Lake chooses to create an identity for herself instead of living out the life that was expected from her, and because of this, there are people that heavily discriminate against her, despite her only wanting to live out her life like anyone else. And also, she chooses her own preferred name at the end of her storyline, which is something that is associated with transgender people. I like this interpretation of Lake's story a good amount. The allegory just fits really accurately onto the themes of this season. And I think this interpretation of her story was also likely intended by the creators of the show. I want to give another spoiler warning right here in case you haven't seen the show and it seems like something you would be interested in. I would for sure recommend that you go watch it and then come back and finish the video. This point going forward, I'm going to assume that you have seen the show, and I'm going to be giving my thoughts on certain characters and aspects of the story that might be confusing if you haven't seen the show, so just keep that in mind.
Should be.
I think season 2 has more of a balance of good fun moments mixed with awful dark moments, which works well for the sake of contrast, and makes the good stand out more and the bad feel even worse. Season 3 features a much darker tone overall, but still sprinkles in some nicer moments in there, with there being a couple of jokes that actually caught me off guard because of how funny they were, despite the otherwise dark tone being set by the season. Season 3 is my personal favorite season, and I think the serious tone for this season was appropriate for this story, considering that this is a story about discrimination with heavy themes of racism. Considering this, I don't think it's a coincidence that the protagonist of this season is a black woman.
Tuba is good.
Oh, well, Tuba is one of the good ones.
At the start of the season, Grace is easily the protagonist who has done the most wrong and has the most to learn out of all of them. She's essentially extremely bigoted against the denizens of the train and hate crimes them daily. Despite her being the protagonist for season 3, Grace is first introduced in season 2, and I think her introduction says a lot about her, because based off her introduction speech to Jesse, it seems like she actually does care about the other passengers on the train. It seems like she's under the false assumption Tulip was in the beginning of season 1, where she thinks that if a passenger's number gets to 0, then they die. Because of this, she spends her time trying to get everyone's numbers as high as possible. So when she tells Jesse that she does this because she cares about people, I believe that she truly believes that. Her one massive oversight is that she doesn't see the denizens of the train as people, even though many of them are intelligent and sentient, and some of them even look like humans. But if they don't have a number, then that means they're not a passenger, and Grace does not care about what happens to them. Her empathy is extremely selective. The only time she sees a denizen of the train as their own person is when she mistakes one of them for a passenger and spends an extended period of time getting to know them. After getting to know a denizen, it becomes impossible to take their personhood away from them, and then her entire worldview starts falling apart. The reveal of Hazel being a denizen created by Amelia, who was supposed to be a replication of Ulrich, is a good one, and having this context changes how you view a lot of Hazel's scenes on a rewatch. Like how she doesn't remember anything about her past.
You don't know? What about your dad?
He was... I don't know.
Or when she randomly uses big words that seems weird for a child to use.
Don't be daft. I'm not leaving Tuba.
Or most obviously how she says that she knows Amelia makes great pancakes, even though she's never tried them, and when Amelia points this out to Hazel, Hazel responds with, "I just know." This is because it seems like parts of Ulrich's memories and personality traits are embedded in Hazel, even if she is still otherwise her own distinct person. Also, going back to Grace, design-wise, I like that Grace has 4 different security tags on her shirt, because a shirt would still have a security tag on it if you stole it from a store, and having 4 of them on her shirt just goes to show how much she steals. It also serves to give her a more spiky silhouette, subtly expressing how violent of a character she is at the start of the season. Also, in my opinion, the music of this show has always been good, but season 3 is the first time that the show starts to feature really memorable standout songs, like the season's opening montage song, or the song that plays in episode 2 that they then play again in episode 3 because they know how fire it is.
See? Isn't this a nice change of pace?
I think that both Grace and Simon at the beginning of the season are pretty despicable people, but somehow I find the relationship between them very sweet. They do a good job implying a lot of history between them and making them seem like childhood friends. A similar thing happens with the relationship between Simon and the cat, where I find both of them to be unlikable characters, but somehow the show still gets me to want them to reconnect again. Speaking more about the cat, it's not like she's evil, she's more like extremely selfish, but boy does she get under my skin sometimes. And also, I think it's interesting that it seems like the cat is a normal denizen like all the other ones on the train, but it seems like she's such an important character in so many people's stories just because she chooses to spend her time exploring a lot of the train and meet so many people and collect so many things as she goes. Because of this, she meets a lot of denizens and passengers and knows a lot about the train, and this is what made her sought after by someone like Amelia in the first place. At least that's what it seems like her whole deal is, but it's hard to tell if they were planning on explaining her behavior a bit more in the later seasons. Back to the other characters of this season, Hazel is actually so adorable and very easy to root for.
Ah! We need backup! He's gonna hit us!
Also, Tuba is cool. I feel like I really don't have that much to say about her, but I do like her, and her death feels kind of like a turning point for the season, similar to how Jesse leaving the train felt like a tone shift for season 2. Both seasons take on a more serious tone after one of the main characters leaves. However, in season 3, this shift happens earlier in the season at around the halfway mark, and really gives time for this serious tone to marinate. I also think this shift is where Simon starts explicitly being seen as an antagonist, since he's the one that kills Tuba. You can kind of tell which direction his story is going in before this moment, but before this moment, Simon and Grace had been mostly on the same page, and Simon could have been equally as capable at getting a redemption arc as Grace. I find it interesting that even after this moment, there are a couple moments where it seems like Simon might still be able to see the error of his ways, but this action of killing Tuba really broke Grace's trust in Simon, so any point going forward where it seems like Simon could have had a change of heart just gets shut down by Grace out of her complete distrust of him until the secret of Hazel being a denizen gets out, and at that point Grace starts to try to convince Simon that they've been doing things wrong, but Simon doesn't trust Grace anymore either after she kept the secret of Hazel being a denizen from him, and this is the final nail in the coffin cementing his role going forward as an antagonist. I also like that the episode leading up to Simon killing Tuba has Simon and Tuba bonding with each other, because it goes to show that Simon was given every opportunity to see the denizens of the train as people, but he keeps his hateful worldview by choice. Tuba, on the other hand, was able to put her judgments aside to actually try to connect with Simon. Hazel's reaction to Tuba's death is also heartbreaking and probably the most emotional this show ever gets.
No! Let's go get her!
Hazel, she's not just gone. She died.
What if I'm really, really good? I promise. I won't do anything bad, ever. Please, Grace, please.
I also thought it was really sad when Hazel decided to leave Grace and go with Amelia, but it was for sure the right choice for her, and it was very mature of her to realize that this would be the better option for her. Still, it's tragic how even though this was her best option, Amelia explicitly says she's not going to be her caretaker, even though Hazel's at an age where she really needs one, but her caretaker that she needed was killed by Simon. I have a feeling that Amelia and Hazel might get along pretty well though, or at least Hazel will be better looked after than she was with Grace and Simon. Towards the end of the season, Grace goes through her own tape, and this sequence is fascinating, especially when keeping in mind what we know from when Tulip went through her own tape in season 1, that your memories are altered based on the feelings you have towards them. This becomes obvious when the memories start changing in front of her, like the memory of her meeting the conductor, but I think her earlier memories could very well have been inaccurate too. Ultimately, they still give us a huge insight into her character, because seeing how Grace perceives what happened to her as a kid is almost more important than seeing what actually did happen to her in terms of understanding her character. I also love the detail of how when she relives the memory of Hazel leaving her, Hazel is much more harsh than she was in real life, and you can see Grace's mouth moving to Hazel's words, because those aren't Hazel's words, they're Grace's interpretation of Hazel's words. Grace's tape and her self-reflection leading to her escaping her own tape is also where we get the most insight into why she was brought onto the train in the first place. Grace's discrimination against the denizens of the train is definitely working against her progress of getting her number down, but that's not a problem that she got until after she was already on the train. The reason she was put on the train in the first place has much more to do with how she was neglected as a kid by her parents, and this led to her lashing out and doing things for attention because she was afraid of being forgotten and needed to be noticed. I honestly feel like the show doesn't really explore this that much, but knowing this does explain some pretty important things about her character, like why she decided to basically start a cult and made herself the leader, so she would be impossible to ignore anymore. I also really like that she doesn't get her exit from the train at the end of the season, because it would have felt very rushed, especially because of what I previously mentioned of how her original reason for being on the train was not really addressed nearly as much as her bad habits that she picked up while on the train, even though those two things are definitely related. Either way, I think becoming a more positive figure for all the kids that she's been leading astray is a better ending for her anyway, and it actually also leaves the door open for her to come back into the narrative at some point in a future season. Season 4 has an amazing start. I felt genuine awe at the end of the first episode seeing a young Amelia being mentored by 1-1.
2 in 1? What is this? Some sort of destiny rubbish?
No, it is mathematics, Amelia. My algorithms are designed to account for a statistical probability that anything can happen on the train. But once these two arrive at their seat, it is up to them to sort things out.
And if they don't?
Then they die here.
Also, I didn't notice it immediately, but 1-1's voice isn't split up into the higher and lower pitches at this point. It's more of a normal speaking tone. He also doesn't have 2 eyes, he only has 1. After noticing this, I remember that Amelia would never call him 1-1. She would always just call him 1. I always thought that this was sort of like an endearing nickname that she had for him. But all this evidence makes me think that he actually just used to be 1, but when Amelia took over the train, she did something to him that split up his personality and turned him into 1-1. Also, 1-1 talking about the passengers arriving at their seat makes me question if the car that each passenger wakes up in has always been chosen for that passenger specifically, but I don't know about that part. This season also has 2 protagonists. Ryan and Mingy. Honestly, I liked Ryan more than Mingy, but I still like Mingy a good amount. I just think Ryan's fun personality and his ambition to be a great musician makes me want to root for him. Despite this, Mingy is correct in thinking that Ryan can be too irresponsible sometimes, and Ryan is hugely overstepping Mingy's boundaries when he keeps making plans for the both of them and not asking for Mingy's input until the last second. Mingy, on the other hand, is more responsible, but he's too afraid of standing out, and this keeps him from doing what he wants with his life. From what we can see of his childhood, this is probably because of how his parents raised him. Throughout the season, it's hard to tell if Mingy actually wants to pursue music, or if this is something that Ryan is just projecting onto him, but it's clear that he's not doing what he wants to be doing. The last episode makes it clear though that he actually does want to make music, but he's been too afraid of taking the risk of actually starting his music career. The car where they need to get into a club and Mingy kept insisting that they should wait in line like everyone else because that's what's expected of them, only to find out that everyone who's been waiting in line has already died of old age, is a perfect analogy for his character. He put it best when he said, "You can mess up even if you stand still."
So, waiting didn't work. You can mess up even if you stand still.
Ryan and Mingy's constant fighting with each other feels super real and awkward and understandable at the same time. Almost every other fight I find myself alternating whose side I'm on, so it feels like there's a good balance in terms of who's in the right and who's in the wrong. They argue so much that I could easily picture these two just deciding to not be friends with each other anymore. And honestly, I'm curious if the train would have let them off if they decided to stop being friends. Because even though they each have their own problems, deciding to not be friends anymore could be seen as a valid solution to their constant arguing if they feel like they aren't good for each other anymore. I feel like if they did this, their numbers would just probably stop being in sync with each other and they would be able to go home when they work through their own problems individually. I'm not sure about this though, because the train might have been able to tell that they would be good friends with each other if they made some changes to their lives, and that might have been the only solution that the train would have been willing to accept. Now I want to talk about Kez. Kez is easily the funniest character in the whole show in my opinion. She is pretty aloof, but in a way that's funny without being annoying. And she has a quality to her dialogue and line delivery that makes it sound more natural and almost like improvised, which really helps her jokes land.
Please don't.
Shh. Just let Mama Kez fix everything.
Kez!
Mama Kez.
She also gives us another moment where the train itself is being questioned when she says, "Sometimes numbers are a part of the problem, not the solution." Kez is probably my favorite Dennison companion throughout the whole show. That's not including Lake though, because she's a protagonist. Since I'm already mentioning the humor of this season, I'd like to say that the jokes in this season are still all family friendly, but they have sort of a more mature tone to them than the jokes in the earlier seasons did. It's like comparing the humor from regular show to something like SpongeBob. One isn't better than the other, but they for sure feel different from each other.
And then you what? Left?
Or what? Stay in the kitchen forever? I am not about to turn the clock back on women's lib, man.
Kez!
Back to Kez, I think it's interesting how she talks about helping Jeremy get over his guilt over something that happened that was out of his control, which leads to him getting his exit, but Kez herself feels guilty over causing Jeremy to leave the train, even though she never intended for that. This is in large part due to Morgan the Castle explicitly blaming Kez for Jeremy leaving them. Kez ends up having basically the same issue that she helped Jeremy work through, but she doesn't realize the issue for what it is when she's the one experiencing it. I think this is due to a larger trend in Kez's behavior where she doesn't lend herself the same grace that she lends other people when they mess up. This is a pretty interesting progression to her character because you wouldn't expect this from her based off the first few episodes that you see with her. Her introduction and her behavior in many of the cars shows again and again that when she thinks she's in the right, she feels no guilt or sympathy for the people getting angry with her. How you view her in these earlier episodes changes though when you think about it in the context of how the only reason she's traveling all of these cars and making all of these enemies in the first place is because she feels guilty and is looking for a way to make it up to Morgan. I also like that Kez kind of gets scolded by Ryan and Mingy when they find out about all of this because even though I find her very sympathetic, she has been basically lying by omission to the two of them this whole time, and I'm glad that's not swept under the rug. Also, Ryan scolding her reckless behavior feels kind of like a stepping stone for him to recognize the consequences of his own irresponsible behavior. I love how these characters are all able to mirror each other in so many ways all at once. Kez also holds a mirror to Ryan again in the last episode when she finally apologizes to everyone instead of running away from all of her problems. And this is what then leads to Ryan and then Mingi apologizing to each other and finding their exits. I'd also like to mention that the Western car is one of my favorite cars of the whole show. Not that it's my favorite episode, but in terms of the world existing inside the car, it's one of my favorites. Also, the moments that we get of Ryan and Mingi playing music are a really nice touch. I'm kind of surprised we didn't get more songs this season, considering the two protagonists are both musicians. It almost feels like music was more important in the third season with the whole intro song for that season and the theme that plays during Grace and Simon's montage sequences, and the lullaby between Hazel and Tuba. In season 4, we mostly only get glimpses of songs that they're working on, but the music is still an important aspect of this season, and the song that plays at the end is really good.
Train to nowhere. Train to nowhere. Train to nowhere. At least you're there.
Also, we get some pretty important lore about the train this season. We see how differently it was run before Amelia's takeover of the train, like how they were given uniforms and their personal possessions were taken away from them when they first got on the train. And we see this change mid-season when their personal possessions are returned to them. We can also tell that the introductory videos explaining how the train works is something that was added after 1-1 came back into control that wasn't there before Amelia took over. This is likely something he added due to 1-1 spending so much time in the other cars of the train and seeing other passengers be so confused about how the train works, like Tulip was in season 1. I mean, we could tell in season 2 when 1-1 mentions Atticus in the training videos that those were newly recorded videos, but it's still interesting to see that before Amelia's takeover, there wasn't any sort of direction that was given to the passengers about the purpose of the train other than their number. We also see Amelia's takeover of the train actually happen towards the end of the season, but Ryan and Mingi, having no context to it, don't understand what's happening at all. This also reveals to us that Amelia was in control of the train for probably slightly more than 30 years. And we actually learn from the shorts of this show, which I'll talk about later, that the number of years that Amelia was in charge of the train was specifically 33 years. And I guess the shorts came out before this season did, so I guess we're supposed to already know that. But I didn't remember that at all, so I was surprised in season 4 when I did the math and realized just how long Amelia was in control of the train for. Also, this context adds some crazy significance to Tulip from season 1, bringing 1-1 back to the engine and reinstating him as the conductor of the train. She ended Amelia's 3+ decade long hijacking of the train. This also made me really curious as to what 1-1 was doing this whole time, and if Amelia had always been hunting 1-1 down as viciously as she was during season 1, and like she just couldn't find him this whole time or something. This, however, is also explained a bit in the shorts, so I'll touch more on that later. After rewatching the whole show, I can confidently say that season 3 is my favorite, but after that it kind of becomes harder to tell what the order would be. But I think season 2 would be my second favorite, season 4 would be my third favorite, and season 1 would be my least favorite. But like I said before, I could really see any of these seasons being somebody else's favorite, and I think they're all good quality seasons. Now, speculating on the future seasons of the show, I don't think the show was hiding the fact that they were setting up Amelia and Hazel to be the main characters of a future season. Considering how much Amelia has been set up since the beginning of the show, it seems like a thing where she wouldn't get her own season until like the last season of the show, but honestly I think it's very likely that she would have been the protagonist of the next season. I saw some rumors online saying that Amelia could have been planned to have been the protagonist of several seasons. And honestly, I could see that happening pretty easily, but it's super hard to speculate on where the show could have gone when you're starting to talk about season 6 and beyond, especially considering that this show has so far been anything but predictable. I wouldn't even be surprised if I was completely wrong about season 5 and it had nothing to do with Amelia. However, I think multiple seasons focusing on Amelia would have been a great direction to take the show in. I could see it being a thing where season 5 is about Amelia, and then season 6 and season 7 are different protagonists, and then the show works its way back to Amelia as the protagonist of season 8 or something along those lines. The thing about theorizing about the future of this show is that there are so many different directions the show could have gone in. We could have a season focusing on a young Amelia, showing in more detail how she took over the train from 1-1 and what she did with the newfound power. We could have a time skip and show an older version of Hazel and Amelia. We could have Amelia and Hazel separate and follow Hazel and a new character. I think in some way the Apex would have become relevant again for sure. We could get more lore about the origin of the train. And that's not even mentioning the very likely possibility of having new seasons with completely new protagonists. Speaking of the origin of the train, I actually have my own theory about what the train actually is, but I'm not gonna lie to you guys, it's hard to speculate on this with any amount of certainty considering that we were only given a piece of the full picture with these 4 seasons. I don't know if they were planning on ever fully explaining the train, but I think it's very likely that there was an intended explanation for it, even if it was never gonna be fully revealed to the viewer. But personally, I think that it's very possible that this dimension that the Infinity Train is from could be Earth from the far future. Pretty much every time they show more of how the train works, it's presented as working on very futuristic technology. The conductor and all of his workers are futuristic robots, and there's even that scene in season 1 where Tulip understands the logic of how the orbs create the cars because she says it's like programming. If the train really just works off of futuristic technology, then the train very well could have been built by humans in the far future, or maybe even just by one person with the help of robots. Even the force that seems to prevent anyone from leaving the train could be explained by some sort of gravity field pulling everyone in the area towards the train. And we know that the orbs can manipulate gravity from the Unfinished Car episode in season 1. So it's not a stretch to say that they're using the same technology to keep people from going too far from the train. The motivation to keep people from going too far away from the train is also there, because 1-1 explicitly states that the purpose of the train is to help people solve their problems. And considering the weird, violent creatures of the wasteland, the gravity field around the train was probably put there to protect the passengers and keep them from wandering into the wasteland. All the denizens from the train could have also have been created from very futuristic technology. We already know that sentient life can be created with the technology at the engine of the train because of Hazel. So it's not a stretch to say that 1-1 created all the life on the train. He even says at the end of season 2 to Alan Dracula, "I really broke the mold with you."
I really broke the mold with you, Alan Dracula.
So I think this part of the theory is actually probably just canon. If all of this is true, then that means that the train's purpose is to take people from the past and transport them to the future onto this train and help them resolve their internal problems before letting them go back to where they're from. I believe that this is being done because whoever originally invented the train wants to actually improve humanity one person at a time in order to prevent humans from ever reaching this point of the future that you see on the Infinity Train. I still don't know what these violent creatures are, but I believe these creatures plus the massive wasteland were created as a result of either some war or something awful that humans did. And the train's purpose is to change humanity from the past, to not have these horrible traits, and to prevent this future from ever happening. I think this theory actually offers a lot of answers to the biggest questions of the show, with probably the biggest question left being what are the violent creatures of the wasteland and where did they come from. But that's something that we were given basically no lore on, so I wouldn't be surprised if that's something that would have been elaborated on in future seasons. I also wanted to mention that in season 2, 1-1 says something that sounds important to the lore, but I actually have no idea what to make of it. He says, "Fun fact, the tape car is the only car where the universe is projected from the outside."
Fun fact, the tape car is the only car where the universe is projected on the outside.
It's what's outside that counts.
This sounds like important information, but I have no clue what to make of it. So I thought I would at least mention it here. If any of you guys have theories on this, let me know in the comments. I also wanted to throw another idea out there. This doesn't really support my theory I just said, but I think it's a valid question. Season 2 is where we see the gravity field of the train at work, but the only ones to experience it are denizens. So, what if the gravity field doesn't work on passengers and is only in place to keep denizens from getting off the train where 1-1 says they belong? I think this is most likely not true, and the gravity field also works on passengers, but if it was true, then it would have some different implications about the purpose of the train than what my theory offered. This would make it seem like the train doesn't care about the safety of the passengers, and the gravity field is only in place to prevent harm to the denizens. Like I said though, I think this is probably not true, but it's interesting how many directions this story could have gone in. Also, while researching for this video, I realized that other people have thought the same as me in thinking that the train takes place in the future, so I'm not the first person to come up with the idea, but the theory as I presented it is still what I came up with on my own while watching the show, so I still wanted to include that segment of the video. Also, since I'm just talking about the train in general at this point, I'd like to say that I do think the train itself as a mechanism for helping people deal with their problems is very flawed, and I think that it's intentionally portrayed as flawed by the show. I think the logic of the train is that by each car having a different scenario that the passengers can experience, it gives a lot of new opportunities to the passengers to learn more about themselves and improve as people. But even though this can sometimes for sure work, like with Tulip, Jesse, Ryan, and Mingy, if we're being honest, it's for sure not a very righteous thing for the train to do to forcefully keep the passengers on this train full of dangerous scenarios, as it could very easily end badly for them, which is what we see with Simon. Even Grace, who learned more about herself and improved as a person, spent so much time on the train that she basically lost her chance of ever living a normal life. Also, the reason she spent so much time on the train is in large part due to the passengers not getting any direction as to why they're there. So the train is very much at fault for her prolonged stay on the train. I know that Grace was put on the train during Amelia's takeover of the train, but there was still no direction given to the passengers before Amelia's takeover, so she wouldn't have been much better off anyways. Because of this, it is for sure a much needed improvement to the train when 1-1 returns as the conductor and then starts explaining how the train works to the passengers and explaining why they're there in the first place. Despite this, I think being put on the train is still not in the best interest of the passengers, especially when so many of them are children that could have a hard time figuring out what issue the train wants them to solve. This isn't even mentioning the fact that the train often treats denizens very poorly, like how Lake was created to basically be trapped in a mirror world forever, and she had to break several rules of the train in order to get her freedom. Or even stuff how like there's a car where there's a toad inside by himself, and his purpose is to be kicked by passengers in order for the door to be unlocked and for the passengers to keep moving forward. I think this toad is hilarious, but even he says that his existence in this car has been nightmarish. Connecting my earlier observation of how it seems like it isn't in the best interest of the passengers to be stuck on the train, back to my theory about what the purpose of the train is, I think that the passengers are meant to die on the train if they can't resolve their issues, and this is so that people that can't deal with their issues are being removed from the human population so that humanity as a whole can move in a better direction.
But once these two arrive at their seat, it is up to them to sort things out.
And if they don't?
Then they die here.
Thinking about the train this way makes it seem much more morally gray, because they're transporting passengers here in the best interest of humanity, but the passengers are being put here knowing that several of them are going to die, and that's a sacrifice that the train is fine making. I feel like this aspect of the train was very likely going to be explored in later seasons of the show. Also, I'd like to ask the question, why is all of this set on a train? Other than its cool aesthetics, I believe the train was chosen as the setting for this show for a thematically important reason as well. A train is a mode of transportation that can only travel on a pre-established path to a pre-established destination. If it is derailed from this course, then it ends in disaster. I think this is an allegory for the course that humanity is on. If this apocalyptic wasteland is truly the future for humans, then maybe it is one that has already been set in stone and cannot be changed. Maybe humanity is already on its set path towards this future. Or maybe the train could actually be successful in rerouting humanity's future and create a new path for humans to follow. Whichever direction the show would have decided to go in would have drastically changed the message being sent by this allegory. If humanity's future is set in stone, then it could send a powerful message about appreciating the time that you've been given and doing what you can with it. This could also tie into Amelia's character arc with her whole thing about not wanting a future if Ulrich isn't a part of it. learning about humanity's grim future could parallel her future without Ulrich, and appreciating the time that she did have with Ulrich in her life could be a part of her character arc. Ulrich dying was like the end of the world to Amelia, and Amelia finding out that this is the future for humanity would be literally confronting her with the end of the world. I think it's very fitting for her journey as a character that she would be the one to confront this aspect of the show. This would also tie into what Tulip said to Amelia at the end of season 1, where she essentially told her that she can't live in the past and has to learn to accept what happened. The train is actively trying to change the past, and I believe what Tulip said here could also apply to the creator of the train. Whoever created the train shouldn't be trying to change the past. They should learn to accept this outcome for humanity. On the other hand, if the train successfully alters humanity's future, then it could send a message about how nothing is set in stone and how you have the power to create the future that you want for yourself. Personally though, I think based off the direction that the show was heading in, I think it's more likely that humanity's future would not be able to have been changed, especially because it could parallel Amelia's character arc. Also, considering what I said before about the train being flawed in its way of trying to help the passengers, I think it also makes sense that the train would be unsuccessful in its way of trying to change humanity's future as a whole. I obviously can't say what the ending of the show would have been, but I think exploring humanity's future and tying it into Amelia's character arc would have made for a great last season of the show. Also, I want to touch on the train documentary shorts they made for this show. They're pretty cute, but nothing that crazy. In the first documentary, you see this grape person whose name is Ben Green, who also shows up in the green room in the party car episode of season 4 as a younger version of himself. Also, this green car can be seen in the background of season 2 episode 3, showing the same hole in the wall left by Alan Dracula. Also, I think it's crazy that it goes from the first train documentary being train documentary number 1 to train documentary 2 being number 4,598,200,004. I feel like 1-1 has to actually just be trolling with this number. In train documentary 3, it's pretty sweet and sad how 1-1 starts talking to Tulip and then he remembers she's not on the train anymore.
And nobody knows why. Miss Tulip, why are there so many...
Oh yeah, she's gone forever.
Also, I think it's funny how 1-1 says bazillion.
When you've got a bazillion cars, they can't all be winners.
Story of my life.
I wonder if that's a hyperbole or if that's like actually the number of train cars there are. Also, Lake is seen passing through this car in the beginning of season 2 episode 1. Train documentary 4 is about Randall, and I like him a good amount, so this one's pretty cool. Also, when 1-1 looks through the telescope in this train documentary, you can see the face of Officer Mace from the Reflection Police in the reflection of the lens. Train documentary 5 returns to the car that 1-1 was found in season 1, and this is where it's revealed that Amelia was actually in control of the train for 33 years, and 1-1 explains that he was stuck in this car for that whole time. At least it seems like 1-1 really likes this car. In train documentary 6, I like the banter between 1 and 1.
Oh, I saw a bird in the distance. I want to look closer.
It probably wants my autograph.
Also, the end where they're upset about a door being broken and speculating on who could have done it feels like a reference to the Apex. But also, there is that one scene where the Reflection Police are breaking down a door, so I don't know who the culprit is supposed to be. This short was released before season 2, so it actually might be about the Reflection Police. But also, the Apex does get introduced in that season as well, so I still don't know. 1-1 has some cute moments in Train Documentary 7, and I could immediately tell that the popcorn lady was voiced by Ashley Johnson, the same person who voices Tulip and Lake. Train Documentary 8 covers the duck car that you can see in season 1 episode 3, and has 1-1 talking about all the cool stuff buried under all the ducks. Train Documentary 9 is like the only time we ever see 1-1 actually be afraid. Also, you can see some of 1-1's things in the background, and it's actually so adorable. You can see a letter he wrote from Miss Tulip with the address just saying her house and then Minnesota. You can also see a drawing he made of himself, Atticus, and Tulip all being friends with each other. I really hope that 1-1 and Atticus stayed in touch after the end of season 1. I think they probably did. You can also see another hole left in the wall by Alan Dracula. Train Documentary 10, which is the last one, actually shows the Apex in it, so that makes me think that maybe the broken door from before was due to the Apex. It also has some more cute 1-1 moments. I wonder if there is a lore reason as to why 1-1 is making all of these train documentaries, but I think the most likely answer is that he's just doing them for fun because he likes exploring the train and filming documentaries. Call me delusional, but I still feel like we could get new Infinity Train content at some point. I know legally speaking it seems like that's not the case, but we're living in an era of tons and tons of reboots, and this is a show that people would actually be excited to see come back. So I don't know how it would be possible, but I'm still holding out hope to see more of the show at some point. Either way, what we did get from the show was amazing, and I'm happy it got to exist at all. Thank you for watching the video, and if you liked it, then I would appreciate a like and subscribe. And also, I make music, so if you're a fan of good music, you should check out my songs. Here's a little preview of one of my songs. And again, thank you for watching the video.
I can't believe I'll say I'm glad you went your way.